Jake's phone exploded with threats as his home address and darkest secrets were blasted online. His family in danger, his career crumbling in real time. The man who saved lives overseas was now fighting a brutal, unseen enemy at home. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jake Collins sat at the edge of his worn leather couch, the dim glow of his laptop screen casting harsh shadows across his weary face. Outside, the night was restless, the kind of restless that matched the turmoil swelling in his chest. For years, Jake had carried the invisible scars of war quietly, never seeking attention, always putting the needs of others before his own. His combat medic years had forged him into a man of unshakable discipline and quiet strength, but tonight, that strength was cracking under the weight of something far more insidious than any battlefield injury. The moment the doxing hit, it was as if the walls around his carefully guarded life had collapsed. His home address, etched into a thread on an obscure online forum, was suddenly public knowledge. Medical license numbers, once mere bureaucratic details, were weaponized to call his professional integrity into question. The private conversations he'd had with colleagues about trauma care, some hopeful, some brutally honest, were twisted and used as ammunition in a smear campaign. It wasn't just about harassment anymore. It was a full frontal assault on everything Jake had built, both as a medic and a man. His phone buzzed relentlessly. At first it was just one or two messages, but the flood came fast and unrelenting. Calls filled with hate, texts threatening violence against him and his family. Jake's wife, Emily, tried to shield their two children from the barrage, but the fear was palpable in their eyes, an unfamiliar terror that had invaded their sanctuary. Jake knew the cost of war was high, but this felt like betrayal from a world he had once trusted. Anger simmered beneath the surface, a cold fire fueled by a potent mix of disbelief and frustration. Why had someone singled him out with such precision and cruelty? Shadow Viper's vendetta was clear, a warped crusade against veterans groups, blaming them for systemic failures that were anything but the fault of those who had served. Jake understood the anger behind those failures, but the personal attack? It was cruel, senseless, and profoundly unjust. The veterans' network Jake had nurtured over the years was his lifeline, a brotherhood of men and women who had walked through fire together and emerged scarred but resilient. They shared stories of pain, recovery, and sometimes quiet victories that didn't make the headlines. This community was built on trust and mutual respect, not the chaos of anonymous hatred. Yet now, the very fabric of that network was threatened by a single malicious force exploiting vulnerabilities none of them were prepared for. As Jake stared at the screen, scrolling through the endless stream of toxic comments and threats, a sinking realization set in. This wasn't just a personal attack. It was an attack on the entire veterans community, on their right to heal, to advocate, to stand together without fear. The troll had picked a fight that wasn't just about him. It was a challenge to every veteran who had silently borne their burdens and quietly sought justice. But beneath the rage, beneath the fear, there was a spark, a determination forged in the crucible of combat. Jake was no stranger to adversity. He had seen comrades fall, witnessed the harshest realities of life and death, and still he had chosen to keep fighting. Now that fight had shifted to a new battlefield, one where the enemy was faceless but no less dangerous. Jake's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his mind racing through the legal options, the security measures, the steps to protect not just himself, but the people he cared about. The network he had built wasn't just a professional association, it was a family. And families didn't abandon each other in the face of danger. This was the moment the storm truly began, a reckoning that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bonds forged in service. The night stretched on, cold and unforgiving, but in Jake's chest a fire was kindling, one that would not be extinguished by threats or lies. He would fight back, not just for himself, but for every veteran who deserved to be heard, protected, and respected. And somewhere deep down, Jake knew this was only the beginning. Jake's world had contracted into a relentless cycle of dread and exhaustion. Each dawn blurred into the next, his body aching from nights spent pacing, haunted by the echoes of threats that came like venomous whispers in the dark. Sleep had become a fragile, elusive thing, stolen in short fragments and tainted by nightmares replaying Shadow Viper's calculated assault on every facet of his life. Anxiety clawed at his thoughts, twisting his mind into knots, fear for his family's safety, the weight of public scrutiny, and the gnawing uncertainty about how deep the damage might run. The isolation was suffocating. Even surrounded by Emily and their children, Jake felt a chasm opening within him, a loneliness born not from physical distance, but from the brutal reality of being targeted so thoroughly and mercilessly. But in the midst of this suffocating darkness, an ember of light flickered. A message appeared. First, a single email from Sarah Martinez, then dozens more. Sarah, a sharp-minded lawyer with a steel resolve and a past forged in Army intelligence, had galvanized the Veterans Network into action. Overnight, what had felt like Jake's solitary battle transformed into a collective crusade. The message was clear and unwavering. He was not alone. Sarah's leadership was precise and unyielding. Within hours, an emergency fund was established, pooling contributions from veterans scattered across the country. Combat medics, infantrymen, nurses, lawyers, and advocates. Each donation carried a story, a shared understanding born from experience. Veterans recounted their own encounters with online harassment, the scars hidden beneath their uniforms, and the relentless fight to reclaim dignity in the face of dehumanization. These were not just transactions, they were threads weaving a tapestry of resilience, a declaration that no one who had served would stand isolated under the barrage of hate. The fund wasn't just financial aid, it was a lifeline. It enabled Jake to enlist the best legal minds versed in digital harassment and defamation. At the same time, cybersecurity specialists fortified his defenses, tracing the digital footprints Shadow Viper had left in his wake and erecting barriers to prevent further incursions. The network, once intangible and virtual, became a fortress built from empathy, expertise, and an unbreakable sense of duty to one of their own. But this fight was more than just legal maneuvering and cyber countermeasures. It was a battle for narrative control. Shadow Viper's attacks were driven by a dark conviction, a self-styled mission to expose the truth behind veteran propaganda. To him, Jake and his comrades weren't heroes. They were symbols of systemic failure, part of an elaborate charade that masked harsh realities veterans faced once they left the battlefield. This grim justification made Shadow Viper's campaign more dangerous. It wasn't simply cruelty for cruelty's sake, but a calculated effort to undermine the legitimacy of an entire community. The troll's rhetoric twisted facts, fed conspiracy theories, and exploited public skepticism about veterans' affairs, creating fissures of doubt in the broader conversation around trauma, sacrifice, and service. Jake found himself confronting not just a faceless enemy, but an ideological war waged in the digital trenches. Every legal filing, every public statement from the Veterans Network was an assertion of truth, a refusal to let the narrative be hijacked by hatred and misinformation. The conflict forced Jake to re-examine his own story, what it meant to carry the weight of service, to stand vulnerable in a world that so often misunderstood the cost of war. Through this crucible, something profound emerged. The collective hope that had rallied around Jake was no fragile sentiment, but a steadfast force, a reminder that even amid the darkest storms, the bonds forged in shared hardship could kindle light powerful enough to push back shadows. Veterans across the country, once isolated by geography and circumstance, now stood united in a renewed purpose to defend their stories, support each other's healing, and reclaim the dignity so fiercely threatened. Every message of support, every shared memory of resilience fortified Jake's resolve. This rising tide of solidarity was a testament not just to his personal courage, but to the enduring strength of a community that refused to be broken. The pain was real. The stakes were high, but in their unity lay an unspoken promise. No one would face the storm alone. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel struck, a reverberation that seemed to echo far beyond the walls of that packed chamber. It was more than a procedural moment. It was the culmination of months of grueling legal warfare, of unrelenting digital forensics and tireless advocacy. The ruling pierced the veil of anonymity that had shielded the tormentor known only as Shadow Viper. The man behind the mask, Dylan Reed, was unveiled. Once a military contractor, now a disgruntled figure whose bitterness had metastasized into a cruel vendetta against the very veterans who, in his eyes, embodied the success he'd failed to secure. This revelation shattered illusions and provided a stark clarity that transformed the narrative from faceless harassment to a human story tangled in resentment, failure, and fractured identity. The exposure of Dylan's identity did more than halt the barrage of threats and misinformation. It dismantled the foundation of his campaign. Stripped of anonymity, his influence waned as legal consequences loomed and public sympathy shifted decisively toward Jake and his network. The victory was not merely judicial, but symbolic, a repudiation of the toxic anonymity that online predators wield as a weapon against the vulnerable. It was a moment that underscored the power of accountability, a principle Jake and his comrades had championed from the start. As news of the court's decision spread, media narratives underwent a profound transformation. The story evolved from one of victimhood to a broader discourse on resilience and solidarity among veterans. Journalists who had once fixated on controversy now highlighted the strength forged in adversity, the collective courage of a network bound by shared sacrifice, determination, and mutual support. This shift in public perception was not incidental. It was hard-won, the result of meticulous storytelling, community organizing, and a steadfast refusal to be defined by fear or shame. Months later, standing before a crowd at the National Veterans Conference, Jake embodied that transformation. The man who had once been overwhelmed by the storm of harassment now radiated a calm, unyielding strength. His voice, steady and clear, carried the weight of lived experience and the hope of hard-won justice. He did not speak as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a leader whose journey through darkness had illuminated a path for others. His story was a beacon, a testament to the power of collective action and the indomitable spirit that binds veterans beyond the battlefield. Jake's speech was more than a recounting of events. It was a call to arms, not with weapons, but with empathy, advocacy, and unity. He challenged his fellow veterans to confront their own silent battles, to embrace vulnerability as a source of strength, and to protect one another from the insidious harms that often lurk in the shadows of civilian life. The audience, many of whom had felt similarly isolated or attacked, found in his words a mirror for their own struggles and a rallying cry for communal healing. The Veterans Network, once fragmented by silence and stigma, had emerged from the ordeal more cohesive and empowered than ever. This collective renaissance was a living testament to the idea that justice, pursued together, could restore dignity and ignite hope even in the bleakest circumstances. Through shared pain and mutual defense, the network transformed from a loosely connected group into a formidable force, capable of challenging injustice, reclaiming narrative authority, and fostering resilience across generations. Jake's personal journey mirrored this larger metamorphosis. His fight transcended individual grievance, becoming a symbol of what is possible when courage meets community. The crushing weight of targeted harassment was alchemized into an unbreakable spirit, a story not of defeat, but of triumph that would ripple outward, inspiring veterans everywhere. His leadership crystallized a powerful truth, that even amid the most harrowing trials, the bonds of shared service and mutual care can forge a legacy that outlasts pain and rewrites the meaning of strength. In the final reckoning, Jake's story stood as a beacon, proof that in the face of calculated cruelty and relentless adversity, the human capacity for resilience and solidarity could prevail. It was a narrative of justice restored, dignity reclaimed, and voices amplified. More than that, it was a call to every veteran still wrestling with their demons. You are not alone, and together you are unstoppable.